In a previous video, I talked about collecting the styrofoam stuff that appliances come in. And I took this 4x8 sheet of insulation foam, laid it out on the floor, and put my collection of packing material on it. And I wasn't thinking real hard about composition. I just wanted to see if I could get all the pieces to fit. And I did. And when I stepped back, I thought, that's actually not a bad composition. So I glued it all together on the floor, took some pictures while I was doing it, and I recommend that. Take photographs while you're working so you can look at your stuff. And then I stood it up against the wall here because it's going to be a wall piece. And I realized why it's a good composition. And in order to do that, I first asked myself, would it look better if it were upside down? And I immediately didn't like it, and I'll explain why in a minute. Then I thought, well, maybe this is a horizontal piece, not a vertical piece. So I simply took the photograph and rotated it so that the parts that are on the top were on the left. And I didn't like that at all. And then I rotated the picture so that the parts that are now on the bottom were on the left. I thought, that composition is not bad. So this could conceivably be a horizontal landscape composition, but that's not what I wanted. I set it up exactly the way I had laid it out originally, without second guessing myself. And it's been standing here, and I've been looking at it. And what I realized is, this works because it is being controlled by some basic compositional elements that you're going to find in a lot of art. And while I want to say you're going to find it in all art, I won't say that because I don't want to defend that proposition right now. Up at the top we have big, heavy, vertical elements, kind of like the top of a door frame. At the bottom we have a piece that looks kind of like a cornice from a palace or something. Anyway, it's heavy. It anchors this rectangle on the bottom, and so the bottom and top have big, heavy elements, sort of controlling everything else that goes on in the panel. Now the top and bottom are connected with vertical, skinny elements. As I said, connect the top and bottom and form a frame. Regardless of what else these things are doing in the composition, they are controlling it. They are defining the borders. So then our question is, what's going on in the middle? And what I realized, and again, I hadn't thought this through, I saw it later, is that we have these big horizontal pieces there and there, with the holes in them. And they're slightly off-center. They're not wildly off-center. If they were significantly off-center, then they'd be where composition would say they should be. But because they're just slightly off, there's a little bit of tension. The symmetry is being broken. And let's take a look at the top piece. This piece here feels like it is being pushed to the right. It's being pushed by this little stuff here so that it can't correspond and meet with the vertical framing element. And it's butting up against this vertical framing element. So it feels like there's a certain amount of tension that way. The piece below it is even further out, and if you'll notice, it goes clear to the edge of the panel. It's pushing itself off of the panel. There is no vertical framing element. These two pieces are working together to form this kind of action to break free of the constraints of the rectangle. And the holes, let's see, put my hand there, and the holes, 1, 2, 3, line up again to give it kind of a diagonal energy. The eye is obviously drawn to the big circle, and then it follows out right to where there is no framing structure. And these two components, mass and energy, are going to be found in all art. You're not going to get away from it. No matter how transgressive you want to be, no matter how abstract you want to be, no matter how many rules you feel like you have to break in order to be a real artist, mass and energy are always going to be there. So there's no point in fighting it, and there's also no point in working it into a composition because it's going to show up. It showed up here without my paying any attention to it. So there's that. The other point, it's really interesting, is in the West we read from left to right. Capital letter, small letters. Capital letter, the rest of the sentence. So over here on the left, where we have these big verticals, that's where the composition starts, and it's moving this way, just as we've seen with these pieces that are pushing out towards the right. The energy is going down and out towards the period, which is out here somewhere. Structurally, it's a sentence. If you take a minute and Google Thomas Cole from the Hudson River School painters, you will see late 19th century landscape paintings in which there is almost invariably on the left a big mass, a mountain, a tree, a storm, a cloud, some big thing anchoring the left-hand side of the image. And then you have the mountains and clouds and trees drifting off towards where the artist wants you to look, which is over here as the sentence of the painting continues towards the point it's trying to make. Capital letter, small letters. You don't have to do that, and you won't always see it, but it's reliable and it shows up a lot. And because we are westernized, we come pre-packaged with an inclination to see the visual world in terms of left and right. It doesn't always show up. It's an inclination. The other inclination is what I said before. It's mass and force. We come pre-packaged with these ideas. You wouldn't look at this and think Michelangelo, but this is precisely what Michelangelo was doing when he created his superhuman figures, like the giants in the Academia, for instance. They're in these huge blocks of stone, and these figures are breaking free. So you've got mass and explosive force. Michelangelo also does this with his ground plans for the churches that he designed. You've got circles with squares erupting from them, or big squares with circles erupting out of them. This idea, which is probably more profound in his art than any place else, although I seek your permission to amend that statement if I find out that I'm wrong. It's kind of like an explosion just about to go off. And it's in that tension that we have story. We even see that kind of tension in novels, in fiction, like London, England, in the 1700s, with its mores and its social rules. And then you've got your principal character, your hero, who is constrained by those rules and is trying to break free. It shows up everywhere. It probably shows up in music. I'm certain it shows up in music too, but I don't know enough about music to give you a good example of that. Beethoven's probably where you'd go to first begin to see how this mass and force dynamic I'm talking about this because next I'm going to start covering it with a lightweight plaster that I'm going to talk about, the engineering of a piece of sculpture. So today's little talk was composition and learning to rely on yourself and what you already know, and may not know you know, but you know about how art works. Now these are not stifling rules. They don't have to be adhered to, and they don't have to be broken. They're just there. Your intuition is the best way to allow them to help you do whatever it is you're trying to do when you're making art. I hope this has been of some help. Thank you.